Philosophical reasoning often assumes that explanation must terminate, that dependencies must point downward toward a final ground, and that when no such ground can be found, explanation ends in nothing. This essay questions that assumption. It asks whether the demand for a foundation is structural necessity or merely a habit of thought. The inquiry begins with a deliberately paradoxical question, whether there could be less than nothing. The question is not posed to suggest a deeper void, but to expose a structural error. Nothing is not a state, a value, or an element. It is a reference limit. Because it does not belong to an ordered domain, it cannot function as an endpoint, an opposite, or a ground. Asking what lies beyond it reveals not a new absence, but the breakdown of the ordering that made the comparison seem meaningful. Once nothing is removed as an explanatory terminus, grounding must be rethought. Dependency is treated structurally rather than hierarchically. To depend on something is not to point toward an origin, but to require that certain constraints be satisfied. Those constraints can be met in more than one way. This leads to the idea of rerouting. Dependencies can be redirected without altering what a structure is, so long as the required conditions continue to be met. Identity is preserved by constraint satisfaction, not by origin. From this perspective, grounding no longer requires a unique core. Rerouting allows for loops. Circular dependency is not automatically incoherent. A loop fails only when a required condition is never satisfied. When dependencies close on each other coherently, grounding becomes distributed rather than foundational. Stability arises from closure, not from a privileged base. This remains true even for infinite structures. Infinity does not imply arbitrariness. An infinite network of dependencies can remain coherent if every dependency resolves and constraints are preserved. What matters is not finitude, but convergence. Stability is captured by the notion of a fixed point, a configuration that remains invariant under permitted transformations. Fixed points replace foundations. They do not ground by being beneath everything else, but by being preserved through change. Self-reference is therefore not inherently paradoxical. It becomes problematic only when it undermines the conditions required for its own evaluation. Self-reference that converges is coherent. Self-reference that does not is not. The result is not a new metaphysics, but a diagnostic framework. Nothing cannot ground explanation. Foundations are optional. Coherence survives when dependencies resolve, self-reference converges, and constraints are preserved. The question of less than nothing dissolves. What remains is structure without a core and explanation without an endpoint.